I mean, I've seen it once.
So you should be an expert by now. You've seen it all the way through. You should remember every single little Easter egg and detail.
Okay.
As like you saw it in the theater and 100 times since.
Okay. I'll try to live up to
You
my
ready?
expectations.
Because we're going. It's a Slasher Saturday podcast, The Return. It's been a few weeks since we've been able to do the last one. I apologize for that. We've both been on and off sick with different illnesses and got the kid running around wrecking shop. So it's kind of hard to settle down and be able to watch a movie like that and be able to sit down and actually talk together. And that's the biggest thing, is getting the different perspectives on these classic films. And joining me together is Elinor.
Hello.
And of course, I'm a big slasher fan, not expert by any means. So do not get those two confused. And Eleanor is a little newer to some of these movies. So the last one we watched a few weeks ago was Friday the 13th Part 1 for the first time for her. And not going to go into a full re-review of that. You can check that out. But needless to say, we were very excited to see this one, I think. At least I was.
Oh, yeah.
And I knew Jason was going to be in it.
That was the biggest highlight for me, as I was waiting for it to happen.
Basically, for me, this was like seeing it again for the first time just because it had been so long. But I know I've seen it before, and you kind of know what's going to happen in these movies.
Right. It was pretty predictable.
Right.
But
I mean,
it wasn't necessarily, that's not necessarily a bad thing either.
formulaic, maybe?
Right.
Stuck
Everything
to the
follows,
same formula?
Yeah, everything follows a formula with these kind of things, especially when the formula is laid out by Halloween. If you've seen Halloween enough times, like I have, you just kind of know, like, this is the feel. This is what we're going for.
For slasher films, especially in that era. And
Yes. 1981, I believe, is when this movie came out.
But I think it definitely followed in the footsteps of the original Friday the 13th film more
I think so, and I think it also did it better, at least in my opinion.
than the first one.
Right. I think
Okay.
it took what the first one was doing and kind of stepped it up a notch, which I
Wow.
appreciated. Not that I, like,
Wow.
oh, of course I love Pamela Voorhees, like we bow to the queen, but like Jason was an interesting add-on to this. I thought some of the kills weren't as brutal as the first movie, but also some of them were a lot more creative, which I appreciated. Like
Yeah, I
the
did
guy
notice-
Mark in the wheelchair getting the machete through his face and then falling backwards downstairs.
That was
pretty
great.
awesome.
That was amazing.
And then the two people doing the hanky-panky, and then they got the spear pushed right through them. That was pretty epic.
Went through the bed into the floor.
Yeah, it's like, that takes a lot of strength to do.
And of course, the guy who got the Ted Bundy looking dude, I swear, he's handsome as hell, and he almost has a unibrow.
And he had this creepy-ass look and was following this girl around in the dark, was like, I have your clothes.
Yeah, I have your clothes while you went over and took a skinny dip. I'm just going to steal your clothes. Hey, look at me. And,
you looking for
you know,
something?
when he got tied up, I was like, karma. And that's kind of what she said, too. But yeah, that kill, that was an interesting one because he's sitting there upside down, and then all of a sudden, you know what's going to happen. Jason comes up and slits his throat. And I remember you said to me, was that the dull side of the machete? And we had to look it up. And
Right, because it looked like the backside of it.
right, the less curved side, or the side that's normally dull.
Right.
But there's actually plenty of machetes that are made that way because they're actually sharper.
Right, and it had like a little bit of a hook at the end, so I was like, I don't know
So
what's going on.
it just looked a little bit different.
Yeah, so I was like, I've never seen a machete look like that because I'm not really a machete expert. So then we
Right.
looked it up and you're like, no, that's the correct side. I was like, okay.
Just different kind of machete.
And I also appreciated in this movie we didn't have any snakes getting murdered. That is
That is
lovely.
a big pro. I will give you that. The reason I was surprised that you said that because the first film has a female villain, a female, not necessarily lead. Well, I guess there is female leads in both films, protagonists, and the main antagonist was a female as well. So I figured you'd maybe be gravitated because of that. But also because there's a lot of people that do hold that first Friday the 13th movie, even though it doesn't have adult Jason as the main antagonist, in such a high
esteem.
esteem, such a high regard, because it's the original. It opened the doorway for the rest of the films. And even though, like one of our viewers said in the comments of the first one we did, the first Friday the 13th review, said that the Friday the 13th franchise is very different than other slasher franchises because the first couple of films is not really like Jason that you know and love from the very beginning. It's kind of an idea of what's to come.
It's like an origin story.
It really is. Like these first three films is kind of a Jason origin story, if you will. Did it bother you that he didn't have the hockey mask that he's running around in the bag?
No, I thought Bagman Jason was interesting. Like,
yeah, I thought it was really cool.
Also seeing his screwed up face at the very end, where he's just like, yeah, with one like eye, and he's like literally grunting at her. I'm like, I'm horrified. I'm done.
Yeah, he looked like a crazy camping lumberjack, and I loved it.
Yes, and it was like, he definitely looks like he was drowned and disfigured. Like, I could believe it looking at this man.
Honestly, when we get to some of the later Friday the 13th movies, even though he's going after campers, it doesn't really make me afraid of going camping, you know? Whereas when I see this Jason, I could see this guy running around the woods if I'm camping in the mountains, and I would believe that this guy could actually exist, this guy in the bag. And I think there is a little bit of extra realism to it, maybe. And that's another thing.
Well, also, like, how real the camp looked in this one. Like, the last one looked pretty real. But this one, with, like, the amount of forest and stuff and the way the beach looked at the lake, like, to me, I was like, I could definitely
might have had a bigger
see
budget.
that. Like, I could definitely see that being a real camp. And I was like, okay, that's a little creepy. And then just imagining, like, a lot of these cabins looked like they didn't have doors that locked. And
yeah,
so
that
I
was,
was like,
that was interesting.
I was like, can you imagine feeling that, like, not safe, where you're in your cabin, you can't lock the door, and you know that you're in a campground where possibly a masked murderer is running around? Like, sounds like bad ideas all around to me. I probably wouldn't do it.
Yeah, maybe not. Maybe.
Like, you know what would also be a problem is if you don't have locks, like bears. Bears are going to get into your shit.
Bears are going to open that door and come looking for your porridge and your peanut butter.
Yeah, exactly. They're going to be like, what you got in here? And you're going to be like, could you please get the fuck out?
The amount of doors in the third act of the movie that... What was the main girl's name?
Ginny?
Ginny?
Ginny.
She, the amount of doors Jenny closed that did not have locks really surprised me.
For me, the big one was the bathroom door didn't have a lock, but then she went in the kitchen and the kitchen door had a lock. I'm like, what is this assery? I would want to be able to lock the door when I am taking a dump. You know what I mean? You don't want some random camper being like, hooty hoo, I'm in here.
Right. It's my turn.
Yeah.
Get off the pot.
Piss or get off the pot. It's my turn.
I got something cooking.
Exactly.
I'm cooking for you.
Yeah, yeah, and then Jason's just sitting outside like, it's my turn, bitch. Get out. Yeah, I really liked this one, though. I'd say there's a lot of iconic moments in the first one, but even, like, the opening scene of this movie where we get the flashbacks from the first film with our main girl, our final girl, from the last film. I can't remember her name for the life of me. Sometimes you see enough of these slasher flicks that it's just like all of these characters and all these characters, their names just blend together for me. And she dies, of course, in the very beginning of the movie. But the fact that she was having PTSD and that kind of PTSD dream sets it up for, I was just imagining it like, I'm in the 80s and I haven't seen the movie in a year and I'm seeing it in theaters. It's nice to have that recap in the very beginning. So then when you go see the second movie, you're like, okay, I'm recapped on the first one. Now that character from the first one dies in the first act. Then we get a title card. Now I'm wondering what's going on.
Yeah, I can see why you maybe see that. For me, though, like, I believe there was only a year between the first two movies. I could be wrong, but I don't know if a recap is really necessary, and I personally am kind of glad that they went away from recaps in movies, and it's a thing of a lot of older films. It's not just Friday the 13th.
Right.
It's an older thing, and I'm glad that they kind of went away with that because the overall rewatch value, if you're gonna I mean, I'm sure they weren't thinking about, oh, in 30 years when everybody has it on Blu-ray or streaming, that they're going to want to
Right.
binge watch all 14 or 12 of my movies.
Right. What they were
And
thinking is, well, this is only available in theaters right now, and
or
VHS
VHS
and
or whatever.
VHS is harder to acquire, more expensive. Not everyone has a VHS player, so
Right.
we're just gonna give a recap for the people who only saw it once in theaters, so they know what's going on. So for back then standards, I like that they did that, but
Yeah.
I agree that it's better for us future viewers that they did go away from that. I'm sure they were like, dude, you're 8 movies in, you know what the fuck is up. We don't need all these recaps. You know what I mean?
Right. So I remember when I saw the fourth movie, which I know this is kind of blasphemous to say, but I saw the fourth movie before either any of the first three. And
Wow.
I remember seeing a recap in the beginning of that one too. So I'm sure when we watch the third movie, it's going to recap the first two, which the third one, neither one of us have seen.
Right.
At
And that's
least
when
I
he
don't
gets his-
believe
I
I
haven't.
might have seen it once. Like I said, if I've seen it, it's going to be like seeing it again for the first time because it's been so long since I got to watch all of them. You know, it was basically whenever they'd come on cable. And
Right.
back then, it was really the more recent ones, like Jason Goes to Hell or Jason X or Freddy vs. Jason and whatnot.
Right.
So I didn't really get a whole lot of exposure to the first three. I didn't get to really watch them on repeat, whereas we owned Halloween.
Right.
So this is a new experience for us, and I'm really excited to continue going into it. But do you think with characters like Pamela Voorhees and Bagman Jason, which is kind of different than the versions of Jason we get later, do you think either one of them are going to show up in the Crystal Lake series?
Oh, I hope so.
Or do you
And
think they're going to just jump straight into hockey mask wearing Jason like the reboot did?
No, I think they're gonna start from the beginning, probably. And also, I just have to say, I loved the usage of Pamela Voorhees in the second movie, where Ginny wore her sweater and was kind of emulating her, but then we see from Jason's perspective, he's seeing Pamela
Betsy
Voorhees.
Palmer.
I loved that. I was like, yes, give us more Betsy Palmer. She is such a queen. She's such a badass.
Yeah, they
Rest
had to
in peace
pay
to
her big bucks just to get that little cameo, but it was worth it for
Oh
sure.
yeah, 100% worth it. Like I'd give her double just to do that. Are you
Yeah.
kidding me? Like that was amazing. I was so excited when I saw her again. I was like,
So you are
Yay.
a big fan.
oh yeah, I really like her. She was the highlight of the first movie for me, and I loved the second movie without her in it, but she elevated it to another level. So I really hope that in the new series, they can bring Pamela Voorhees back and Kid Jason and do it justice, because Betsy Palmer really like laid the scene for like this is a
It's a
really
high bar.
Yes, very high bar for Pamela Voorhees. So I'd love to see someone do their own rendition of it.
And they kind of
see what it
already
would
have
be.
done that in the past. There already was other attempts of other versions of that character that really haven't lived up, to be honest.
Right. And so I'm excited to see what the future holds. And I think they are going to start. I think I read somewhere that it was going to start with Kid Jason. So I think it would probably be like the first season would be focusing on Kid Jason, the accident, Pamela Voorhees, setting up Camp Blood and Camp Crystal Lake. Maybe we even see everyone alive and at the camp for a couple episodes. And then I think like either the end of season 1 or the beginning of season 2 would be Bag Jason or Mask Jason. So that's
Right.
how I think that series is going to go. But
Right.
as for the movie we watched, I thought, there was, of course, nudity and dumb characters, which every good slasher film needs. But I think that the last two characters were actually really likable.
Ginny and
And Paul.
Paul.
Yeah, both of them were really, really likable.
I liked them a lot. Yeah, they were likable. I don't think those two were dumb by any means. But yeah, the rest of the characters really in this movie, and as well as the first film, part 1, were rather, your average pot-smoking teenagers that are there to drink and have
Get it
sex
on,
and
yeah.
and also, more importantly, get killed by our main protagonist. Or so
I
that,
will
that's-
say, I'm glad that Muffin lived.
Oh, that was so great that we thought it was going to be Jason there at the door, and then, oh, there's little Muffin. And then, of course, Jason came through the window. But yeah, I absolutely, when I was watching this movie, I will say, uh, I thought that I would get a little tired maybe of seeing Bagman Jason, just because I am such a sucker for the hockey mask and machete wielding Jason that we all know and love. But seeing this earlier rendition, who almost at times you said you were getting kind of some Michael Myers vibes.
Yes, definitely.
Especially from before we actually see him in the bag, before when we just see his feet walking around, or we actually heard him breathing once, which was interesting.
Yeah, that's really reminded me of Michael. I was like, do you hear that breathing? It sounds like Michael. And also, like you said, seeing the big heavy work boots, seeing the kitchen knife in his hand.
Kitchen knife, pitchforks,
Yeah.
all sorts of different weaponry, which that was what I
Barbed
really
wire.
liked.
Yeah.
Spears and all sorts of different weapons, and the kills were really creative. And you said they were a little, at times, maybe held back or
censored,
censored.
kind of?
Yeah, a little bit. I don't know. I go back and forth because in part one, I felt the same way with some of the kills, but they would cut away. But then other kills I thought were really great. Maybe I'd give the kills slight gorier edge to part one, but maybe creativity to part two. Pacing, I would maybe have to give to part two.
I liked the pacing in this one.
Because I feel like the first half of part one, before we got significant amount of kills, it felt a little slow at times.
Right.
Which it often does in the Friday the 13th movies until we start getting those kills, because then we start rooting for these people to die. At least I do. I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy.
No, I think it's common because, they make these characters that are pretty flat, and then you have Jason who comes in and kills them, and that's kind of the exciting part of the film.
And maybe it's just that. Maybe it's just common sequel syndrome, where, of course, everything is bigger in the sequel, which includes the kill count. So I'm sure maybe
I think they
the
actually
pacing,
did kill 13 people in this one, so
maybe the pacing just felt better because there was more kills. I'm just guessing. Maybe there wasn't more kills. I didn't tally it up.
I think there was.
But it felt like there
was more kills. It wasn't like all of them were kind of rushed in the last act.
Like I
which
said,
didn't
we're not
necessarily
horror experts by
Right.
any means.
Right.
We're just a couple of friends talking movies.
Right.
So
Exactly. And I just feel like, it felt a little more even with where our kills were. In the first movie, there was like one in the very beginning,
And then
two
it-
maybe, and then it had like a dry spell.
it felt like there
And
was a
then there
drag
was-
a little bit.
Yeah, and then there was a lot of kills toward the middle and end. Whereas this, it felt like they were spaced out, kind of sprinkled in, and then at the end got gradually more.
Right.
And so I felt like they were kind of figuring out the pacing in this movie. And I'm hoping that by the third movie, it's like boom, 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 boom. They really figure
Right.
it out.
Right. I'd say either way, the first half of both films are pretty similar in pacing and tone and character development and character writing. So I know it might be blasphemous to say, but I wouldn't really give either one a big edge over the other.
Right.
And then when we get into the third act of each film, I don't know why we're comparing both, just because we've seen both recently, and
Right.
I like both films, so I'm going to compare them. And also, they're both pretty similar, I would say.
I think that's the big thing, is that they're very similar. It's almost
But
kind of like a rehash.
It really is
in the
kind of
part
just a
two.
rehash of part one, but you kind of
Right.
swap out Pamela for Jason, and
And
in
you
the
swap
first
out
movie,
the dead snake for an underage girl.
or
having to do that
that
sex
as well,
scene.
that as well, and also Pamela's deceased head. But I would say in the first movie, it seems like it's Pamela avenging Jason, and this one it's Jason avenging his mother.
Yeah.
And so they're very similar in that way. So when the third act kicks in and Pamela shows up in part one, there's a change in the atmosphere when she starts talking, because
Right.
Betsy Palmer is just instantly the best actor in the movie
Yeah.
that we've seen so far.
Definitely.
So it just,
Elevates it.
elevates the room. In this movie, even though we don't really get to hear Jason speak, as soon as he actually uncovers himself from the blanket and sits up and the chase begins, which was a long, nice chase scene, it also did that for me. It also
Yeah.
elevated the room
When it kind of
without
like
any words.
reveals the killer almost, you know what I mean? Like we already know who's doing it. And it's similar with
Yeah.
Halloween movies. You already know who's doing it. But when Michael or Jason really come out and they start picking people off quicker or the final girl circuit starts, it really changes the way the film
I
goes.
feel like it's different though, because it's not just, at least for me, it was different because we see Michael throughout the entire movie.
Right.
Whereas in this one, we get to see more of Jason as the movie goes on. I feel like at first we just see from his perspective, and then we see a little bit from his boots, and then it just kind of goes up and up and up until finally he uncovers himself, and the camera lingers on the only thing you can see of his face, which is his eye, which
Yeah.
in a way is almost creepier than the mask at
Especially
times.
that you can only see one
You
eye.
can only see his one good eye. And to me, it was a little creepier at that moment. But then when the chase scene ensues, you see, okay, he isn't this unstoppable killing machine, at least not yet that we know.
Right.
It seems like there's at least an element that is still human, would you say?
Well, yeah, I would give it to him right now that he probably still has a little bit of humanity left because he doesn't seem like he could take a machine gun and get back up as of right now.
Right. Whereas
Like a
in
machete knocked him down in this one, where in later movies you'd do that to him and he'd be like, "LOL, I'll take the machete out and kill you with it."
exactly, literally. Do you think that makes the character more interesting if he's like less OP, I guess?
Not necessarily. I don't think that they need to be less OP or more OP to be interesting. I think it's the way the kills are set up, the way the movie's set up, and, you know, the origin story. And I think so far they've done great with the origin story, and it makes Jason interesting there. I think if you just have, like, there's sometimes, there's sometimes slasher films where it's like, I'm just not invested in the main characters, and I'm not invested in the antagonist either. And so it just feels kind of blah.
It's kind of boring.
With Halloween and Friday the 13th, both of them give you just enough origin story to make you think about these characters. And with Michael and Jason, you wonder if there's a supernatural effect to them or not. And of course, with Jason later on, it totally is supernatural.
Right. You just wonder what it is.
Right. You're like, is it the devil? Is it a perpetual love for his mother? What is it? Like, what is driving his evil spirit to continue?
And to me, I agree with you. I don't feel like it's any less interesting if he's a just normal cabin killer, just a crazy guy running in the woods who's been living in the woods, saw his mother die, and so he's just really strong because we need a strong villain. Or if he's almost like a zombie, but not a zombie's not even a right term, because if you shoot a zombie in the head, traditionally it dies, whereas like in Jason X, you literally turn him into smithereens and he's going to regenerate. He's like Deadpool. I mean,
Right.
he's almost unstoppable. I don't think it's necessarily less interesting either way. I know some people feel different, and that's totally cool. I'd love to hear their personal perspective on it, to get their insight on it. But like you said, it's just kind of how they write it. And with this character going forward in the new show, I don't really have a personal preference anymore on which way they went. I kind of figured they would
I
go.
just want to see more Jason. I don't really care.
I just hope it doesn't take 3 seasons to get to adult Jason.
Right. If
Yeah.
it takes a season and you
One
set up
season.
a really good origin story, we get to see a lot of Pamela Voorhees. Like,
Yeah.
I would be totally down. Get to see more of the camp when it was open and the way it looked back then. I would love to see that too.
Sure.
But
absolutely.
even if it's only half a season, I'd be fine with that too. But I think if it takes any more than one season, I think it might feel like a drag.
Right. It might. Or like they're just trying to delay the inevitable.
Right.
Because we've seen, for instance, there was another show, Gotham, which they had this great idea to do a show based kind of like this is Crystal Lake. They wanted to do a show in Gotham, but they didn't have the rights to do Batman, or they weren't able to do adult Batman. But they
Right.
basically did everything else until the very, very end of the show. And yeah, a lot of times it was like, okay, they're just creating shit to basically just get another season out, right? Because they can't do what we want them to do and what
Which
they
is
would
Batman.
naturally do. But with this case, with Crystal Lake, all hands are on deck. Everything is on the table.
Right. So I think if they do this right and they take some good creative liberties, I'll be excited to see it. Yeah.
Absolutely. So you would grade this above the original. If you were going to rewatch Friday the 13th movies next year, next Halloween or whatever, where would you start?
I'd still start with the original. I still would because I like I said Betsy Palmer. Like I would watch that movie just for her, if anything. Like
Super iconic. And yeah, it
iconic.
was great
She
to see
like
her.
brings the film. Like if you would, I'm not saying this is my grading of the film, but if that film was a 3, she comes on screen and it's a 7. Like instantly, she elevates it so much, and
Right.
especially like when she goes, "Well, I'm Mrs. Voorhees." I'm like, "Oh, chills."
I'm a friend
so
of the
good.
Christies.
Yes, so good.
like-
oh, I love it.
Oh, they're going to kill us. And she says, I'm not afraid.
You're
And it's
like, oh, there's something going on here.
I was like, you're so inspiring. You know,
Right?
just 'cause the way she says it, I'm not afraid.
And then she's
so
like, "Come on,
confident.
dear."
Yeah.
And you're like, "Oh my god!" Like,
That's just things that Jason can't do. He
Right.
can't give you those almost
like a
safe-
trusted adult,
Right.
Like like when you're a kid, you're like, "Okay, well, this is an
False
adult."
sense of security.
Right, like this is an adult that has a motherly presence, so I can probably trust them. Like she gives you that.
Right.
And then totally flips the table on you, which is what makes her scary. And I think it's fantastic. So I really hope in the new series, like I want to see Mrs. Voorhees, please.
And you know, just because they kill her off eventually
Doesn't mean we can't see elements of her or flashbacks or
doesn't mean Jason can't. I mean, we've seen
communications
like
with her.
right. We've seen like dream sequences in other movies of Jason having dreams of his mom, or even in we've talked about Halloween a lot. We've seen Michael Myers hallucinate his mom, and that didn't really turn out the best for some people, for some fans. So I don't know if that's really the greatest way to go.
But you could have like her voice just like, "Do it," you know?
Do it. Kill them from mother.
No, you just turn around and it's Pamela in like a hood, like Sidious, but she has her arm sticking out. You see her sweater, and she's like, "Do it."
must be done.
Jesus Christ.
Alrighty, folks. Well, that will do it for Friday the 13th Part 2. Both of us really like the movie. If you have not seen it, I don't know why you'd be listening to this. I'm sure you're probably an expert on horror if you're listening to this. And what should we watch next? Should we watch Friday the 13th Part 3? Let us know in the comments below. Whatever you think, we'd love to hear it. Thank you for being here. If you enjoyed our conversation, then please give this video a like, as it really does help support the show. Please consider subscribing to Speed Force Media, as we are ever growing in our new second channel. Make sure to hop over to our sister channel, Shipwrecks Sunday, if you're a historical fan or if you want some realism, a nice palate cleanser for the week. That will do it for us, sorry. My name is Derek.
My name's Elinor.
See you next time.
What's your favorite scary movie?